Hello, welcome back to Rabbits Forever. So today I'm not going to do really anything with the rabbits, so I just brought Callisto, my little smoked pearl Britannia Petite out, and so that way you guys can watch them while I talk. But today I'm going to talk about a question that I got recently asked, and I realized that this isn't really a common sense question. It's not something that think you really think about because in the wild, rabbits typically live in groups, right? So, for a pet person or somebody who doesn't really know, sorry, I'm going to twist this, somebody who really doesn't know a lot about rabbits, doesn't realize, well, in their mind, even when I first started, I thought the same thing, is that since they live in groups in the wild, why can't they live together in a big hutch or in a large uh, area? Now, this is a very controversial topic just because a lot of people have their own opinions on it. However, if you talk to really any breeder, they're going to tell you best bet, don't keep rabbits together at all. Do not keep rabbits together because unless you actually have a good setup, it could end absolutely horrible. You could possibly, in worst case scenario, hopefully this doesn't happen to you, but worst case scenario, you could end up walking out to your rabbits and having one or two of them dead or bleeding out or missing. For my instance, I did this because I was told, hey, if they're introduced to one another young and if they're nice to one another and you keep watch of them for a while, they should be fine. So I did. And one of my animals actually ended up with a missing tail. She had her tail bitten off, and I never noticed because rabbits, what I learned later on is that they will actually clean up their own blood. So if you're probably not going to find any blood unless it's staining the walls of the cage, because mine were on a solid bottom cage and had pine shavings and stuff that they were walking on. So since she bled all over, she just ended up eating those pine shavings. One of them did. So I didn't actually catch it until later on when the bone was exposed and um, her skin was already scabbed over and everything. So that was a very sad moment for me personally because it was so far exposed that there was nothing I could do about it. It's not something that would have been easily, uh, just wrap it up and it would have been fine. It was so far exposed that I actually had to take her in and get her. Uh, I didn't have the money at the time or anything because I was a kid then. I was very young. It was one of my very first projects, so I actually ended up taking her to a humane society and they fixed her up and got her a new home and everything because I wasn't able to take on that expense or anything. I want to say I was like 10 years old or something. I was pretty young when this happened. So that was definitely a experience for me. I was pretty devastated. She was one of my first rabbits I ever owned. So that was, as a kid, I did experience a lot of that because she was also a doe that would eat her kits and stuff. So I understood that, things happen to bunnies and they're not always this cute little cuddly being like Callisto is here right now. Um, it can be pretty devastating, especially if it's your little kid. Like if you buy it for a little kid, like a 3, 4 year old, this is their first pet. They're so excited. They're not just working with this thing as a breeding project, because that's what this girl was. She was one of my breeding projects. Um, so I kind of already had that mindset of a breeder where it's like, hey, animals die, it's okay. But if you're buying this for a pet for a little kid, and this rabbit is their life or something, and they're so excited about this animal, and there's nothing better in the world than this cute little rabbit, then that can be pretty traumatizing and devastating for that little kid to walk out and have a dead rabbit. Now, there are ways to get around this. There are, you can get your rabbit spayed or neutered, and that works very well. It's still not 100% success rate, but you're a lot more likely to have those bunnies get along with one another than if they still are intact, males or females. Just because the hormones, what really kicks in and gets them aggressive and nippy and towards one another, not towards you. Usually it's not towards you, at least. Every once in a while you can get a bunny that's a little moody. But so if you take those hormones away, they usually do pretty well with one another. They're usually pretty cuddly and lovey towards one another. I have had 2 bunnies in the past that were very good with one another. They were intact females, they were sisters, they did great, and that was a surprise situation. And same with my males. I actually had 2 intact males from the same litter, and just didn't realize how old they were. And they did wonderful together. I accidentally had them together for 8 months. So they both were dropped and everything, and they were sexually mature, but they didn't nip at each other. I didn't find any scars or scabs or nothing on their bodies, so they were perfectly fine with one another. But those are very few situations. For instance, I've been breeding for a decade or so, and those 2 situations were probably the best out of all of them. Because I have had instances where babies that weren't even sexually mature started nipping at one another and started chewing on each other's fur and biting one another, and they weren't even sexually mature yet. They were just starting to get hormones. And I've been breeding for a decade, and I've only had 2 instances where that worked out. In my cases, I also don't try to do that. There are also people who do colony situations, but that is a much larger area. It's usually a large outside dog kennel pretty much, and then you put a few rabbits in there. It's usually for breeding purposes because you usually have multiple does and then 1 or 2 bucks in there. And it's just for meat breeding purposes usually, because then you go out and catch the babies and stuff. It's not usually a pet purpose, just because rabbits will dig. You'd have to look up that by yourself and do your own research on that if that is what you're curious. If that's what you're interested in doing, is a colony situation. And that can be dangerous as well. It's also a lot more difficult to actually handle your animals, just depending on your animals. Each individual animal is going to handle it differently, and also how often you handle them. But this video isn't about the colony situations because I've never had experience with that. This is just about putting rabbits together, and I highly suggest against it unless, like I said, you get them spayed or neutered, because it would be awful for you or your children to walk out and experience the horrific sight of what rabbits really can do to one another, especially if you're a breeder and it's one of your show rabbits or something. Usually people who show rabbits don't keep them together anyway, just because just a little nip can cause a fur discoloration, which can disqualify your animal off the table and stuff like that. So usually breeders will keep them in separate cages just to make sure that they're still show ready and they're not chancing a $500 rabbit, and that's an extreme, but like $100 to a $500 rabbit getting nipped on by another one that was maybe a baby or something like that, and then you just being disqualified off the table. That would really stink, and that's why most show people don't. But if it's just for pet, you usually don't care about that. So I definitely suggest, if you really are adamant on doing that, getting your animal spayed or neutered. However, if you choose to get your animal spayed or neutered, understand that it's very expensive. It is a very risky procedure because rabbits are very small. Compared to a dog or a cat, they're quite small. It can be done. and it's a lot safer than what it was in the past. However, it is still a dangerous procedure for these guys because anesthesia affects each rabbit differently, each animal differently. And you have to take that into consideration that you could beat out a rabbit if it just doesn't go well, if your animal doesn't handle the procedure well at all. So my biggest suggestion, plus not only that, but most vets won't even see a rabbit. They might see them for little things, which usually they still don't know a lot about, just because rabbits are more, I don't want to say of an exotic pet, but they kind of are, because you usually don't take your rabbit to the vet. And if you do, you usually have to find a special vet who will actually take your rabbit and know something about the animals, other than, oh, it looks sick. Well, we can research it and try to find, a solution instead of, and most breeders, they do everything themselves because it's quite expensive to take your rabbit to a vet too. It's very expensive, actually. I know last time I tried to take one of my pet rabbits, which was a long time ago, it was, I think, almost $100 just for the vet to see them and to actually check them over and do any sort of tests. Hey, don't chew on that, buddy. But yeah, so it's all your decision. I just suggest don't keep them together. Again, if you are adamant on keeping them together, please get them spayed or neutered. Have a great day. Thank you for watching. Bye.